Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a review. It's a review that I really have to say thank you to a couple of my perfume god people. Rachel, who we love you on this channel. We know you're a moderator on our live streams whenever we get a chance to do them, which is few and far between. But Rachel is like the house mom of Channel Ram, and she sent me this beauty in the mail maybe like a year or two ago. So I've been sitting on this for a while. This is Darren Alan's Chypre No. 1. And you can see I put a pretty good dent. I mean, it looks like there's not a lot gone, but this is a pretty fat sticker. So when you flip it over, you realize just how much of this I've worn. And then I got this in the mail the other day from somebody. Darren Alan's Chypre No. 1 in the sample form. And I figured, you know what? I'm going to review this because this is a Chypre that really is extraordinary. And you'll see why I say that in just a little bit. But the first thing that popped in my head, the very first time I smelled this a year and a half, 2 years ago, whenever Rachel very kindly sent me this Discovery Atomizer, is 3 fragrances came to mind. Roja's Chypre Extraordinaire, which is my least favorite of the 3. And then probably the 2 that battle for supremacy in my mind is Darren Alan Chypre No. 1 and Zoologist Civet. Zoologist Civet is a fragrance created by Shelley Waddington. It's probably my favorite fragrance by Shelley Waddington. I would buy a bottle of that. I think it's one of the best zoologist fragrances I don't have a full bottle of. I would like a full bottle of Sacred Scarab, and I would like a full bottle of Civet one day. And T-Rex, which is probably my favorite Antonio Gardoni fragrance. But staying on track, this is a very interesting classical style Chypre. So this really throws back to the 1920s and 30s in composition. It's a very classical style is the best way to put it. And the thing is comparing it to Chypre Extraordinaire and also Civet by Zoologist. I've never heard anyone else make that kind of comparison, but to me it was almost instantaneous. Just like to me it was almost instantaneous when I really got into fragrances that I loved Chypres. Chypres were one of my favorite categories. And it's interesting because throughout the whole wear, there's one thing I want you to keep in mind about Darren Alan Chypre No. 1. And that's, to me, there's this almost film of butter. Like a buttery texture. Sometimes even a buttery smell. But a buttery texture that just kind of carries the fragrance all the way from the beginning to the end. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is Chypres are very complex. So I can't just sit here and say it smells like this or it smells like that. I can tell you maybe what I think the opening smells like, or what it starts to smell like in the mid, or what it starts to smell like in the dry down. But this is not going to be the type of fragrance where you can just say it smells like this, because you would then have to say it smells like this at what point, because there's so much going on. There's so many little twists and turns, and it's an entire story. And that's one of the things I really love about Chypre. So again, to my nose, this is built very similar to how Chypre Extraordinaire and Civet are built. They share very similar scaffolding in an interesting way. The Roja is the most floral of the bunch, and I have reviews of all 2 of the remaining other ones I'm kind of comparing this to right out of the gate. So if you want to learn about Chypre Extraordinaire, which I did not like, and I definitely didn't like the fact that Roja went from $1,750 and slashed the price in half, basically, just because. And I did not like that at all. And the Civet, though, is an amazing value for money because it does a lot of what Chypre Extraordinaire does at an even better price. So, but what's interesting is when you're comparing the 3, there's one that stands out as almost the most natural smelling of the 3. And it's not the one that used to be $1,750. It is Darren Alan Chypre No. 1. This is by far the most natural smelling of the 3 to me. And the notes really pop off of my skin. I mean, they pop off like one of those pictures where you stare at and pretty soon you start seeing like 3D images where it only looked like a flat kind of picture before. The beauty of the overall blend of how Darren Alan blended everything together. For someone who was a self-taught but did have some training, all right, Darren Alan is not completely self-taught. He did have some training. But for somebody in his kind of situation, let's say, to use natural perfume ingredients and blend it with the synthetics in this way. This is very, very impressive stuff, I have to say. Very impressive stuff. And I would urge you to go to DarrenAllan.com and learn a little bit about him. He's been in the game for something like 30 years or 20 years, I can't remember. And he does have some, like I said, training, but he also has a lot of self-taught work that goes into this, a lot of time and tinctures that he individually makes, which we'll talk about. So it's interesting stuff. I think his work is very interesting, and there is an entire Darren Allan live stream on the channel if you want to check that out. It's one of my earlier live streams with the even awful reception, but good enough to make out what I'm saying, but not the best, let's say, reception from that live stream. But you will be hearing more about Darren Allan on the channel one way or another, I'm sure, okay? So you have to think of this as a big, complex, classical style Chypre. And the note you're going to pick up in the opening, in the first 5 minutes or so, is orange, okay? So orange in its tangy, orangey glory is going to hit you right from the beginning, and it almost has that sticky sweetness of, just imagine like drinking some orange juice and spilling some drops on the table or on the counter, and then just leaving and coming back, and those drops have hardened. They've that sticky sucrose sweetness of the orange has kind of just hardened itself into the table or into the counter. And then you try to put your hand on it and just wipe it off with your finger, and you can't because it's kind of sticky, right? Just imagine while eating an orange, you don't get that sucrose sweet aspect by itself, because you're also getting the tangier aspects of the orange along with it. Everything just blends together, right? That's how the orange comes across in this. Yes, there are some stickier, sweeter aspects that will remind you of maybe the stickier, sweeter aspects of another fragrance, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But for those of you that don't know, I think this is going to be one of those reviews that you're really going to have to, use some imagination on. And also, the reality is that when I wear Chypre No. 1, I get so many different elements all at once. So I could just sit here and say, well, it's floral and spicy and fruity and mossy and citrusy, and it's got some of the orris butter and all of this different things. I could just say it smells like that, but that would not tell you anything about what the fragrance smelled like. You can't just say, well, it's spicy and fruity and Chypre style, and that gives you zero idea of what the fragrance smells like. So as a genre, you have to understand that Chypres are very complex, and they do change a lot, is the other thing. So they go through these different transitions. They give you a lot to smell, or I should say they give me a lot to smell. That's one of the things that I really like about wearing Chypres personally, is that they go through these different transitions and they show you different facets as the fragrance develops. So there's a lot for you to take in and engage with, okay? Which I appreciate. I really do appreciate that. So, but they aren't easy to pin down, okay? It's not something where you can just sit up here, turn on the camera, talk for 5 seconds and end it, and you know exactly what this is. No, this is very rich and complex. It changes a lot, goes through transitions. And if you just think of all the great Chypres, I would say, of the past, like over time, right? So think about things like Coty's Chypre from 1917. Think of Guerlain Mitsouko, which I will have the intestinal fortitude to review this one of these days. This is one of my favorite versions I've ever come across. This is the vintage Parfum de Toilette from the late 70s, we think. Late 70s, maybe early 80s. But this is absolutely phenomenal. One of the greatest Chypres of all time. And of course, Diaghilev, which I've got a review of Diaghilev if you want to check that out, from 2010. And all the amazing Chypres that have come in between. I have multiple videos on the topic of Chypres if you want to kind of learn about it. But in a nutshell, for those of you that don't know, Chypre is the name in reference to, in French, to the island of Cyprus, is basically what it is. So many folks think because it is Cyprus that it has to do with the cypress tree. That is false. You can have cypress in a Chypre, but that's not what it's referring to. It's actually referring to the island of Cyprus. And the reason is that the island of Cyprus goes back to ancient times. The oldest perfumery ever found on Earth was found on the island of Cyprus. And I think you can even visit it. It's like a museum of sorts now. But there are many reasons given about it being Cyprus. But if you believe in man telling tales throughout the ages kind of thing, Cyprus was the island where Aphrodite lived. the goddess of love, and she would always rest her head on a pillow and slept in a bed of mosses, okay? And hence the oak moss base. And there are very other interesting connections with chypres. Basically, chypres are made up traditionally of 3 or 4 ingredients, and then you can kind of spitball and build them into all these different ways. You could have leather chypres, floral chypres, all these different types. But they're usually made up of citruses in the top, usually bergamot being the most important, labdanum in one form in the heart or the base of the fragrance, which is usually harvested from the rock rose plant, which has a connection, which has no connection to the regular rose, but it does grow, that you're thinking of, but it does grow on the island of Cyprus heavily. So it's heavily grown on the island of Cyprus, and you get the oak moss in the base, and usually patchouli as well. So it's made up of those 4 main ingredients are very important to a chypre. That mossy bit, which is so important to modern chypres, are kind of neutered in modern perfumery. They are castrated straight up. I mean, modern chypres have a very, very hard time because of IFRA regulations that limit oak moss, which you smell a pretty good dose of oak moss in this. So my guess is that there is some sort of either Darren Allen's not IFRA compliant. I don't know if he is or not, so don't quote me on this, but 0.1% of oak moss in a composition is not very much. And so many of the all-time great chypres, like Mitsouko, have gone through some pretty, big reformulations over the years. Because oak moss gives chypres like this very vintage, this texture, this feeling of like rubbing your hand on moss growing up and down the side of a tree and just imagine like feeling like the grooves and the dips and the dimples and the bumps and all that stuff on the tree. And Darren Allen does a really good job of emulating that feeling in Chypre No. 1. It's I think he's either not IFRA compliant, which is definitely a possibility, and if anyone knows, leave it in the comments, or if he is IFRA compliant, he did a hell of a job of sort of using that fractionated oak moss, they call it, where by this fractionation method, they basically remove the bad parts of the oak moss, the quote-unquote bad parts that gave like one person a rash 20 years ago in their stupid study, where they put oak moss directly on someone's skin and then covered it up. Who does that? But so the way they did their test is insane. It almost seemed like they wanted to ban oak moss so that people could buy the more expensive oak moss products from IFF and Givaudan and all that stuff. But that's my conspiracy theory brain thinking. I'm sure that has nothing to do with reality. But so whenever you use this fractionation method, it basically leaves a hole in the smell of the oak moss. So it has to be filled with something. So Thierry Vasso traditionally filled it with something like celery seeds or different things like that to plug the gap in some of the Guerlains that he came up with his own sort of process, if you will. There are some fragrance historians that even claim that this whole style of fragrance, this Chypre style, can be traced all the way back to Roman times. So when I say this smells vintage, I could really be meaning this smells very vintage. So here's the thing about Chypre No. 1. The first hour is characterized with what Mr. Darren Allen calls candied citruses. That's how he describes the fragrance in the opening. And I agree with him to that effect because my nose, like I said in the beginning, gets you on that spilled OJ pretty quickly on the counter, left to harden. Maybe with some spices in the beginning before your nose will pick up that sort of, that buttery aspect is always there. So imagine the feeling of soft butter that was left out on the counter. There's definitely this buttery aspect to the fragrance. You get it a lot right before the OJ really makes an appearance in the opening. But within the first 5 minutes, you're going to get that orange juice hardening on the counter. If you watched my review of Frederick Mahl's music for a while, you will know exactly where I'm going with this because I said something similar about the pineapple juice. And a lot of folks have said this actually. But here, it's orange juice instead of pineapple juice, okay? So it's not as prominent and sticky as the pineapple juice in music for a while, but if you can imagine this sticky smelling orange juice that is flanked by 2 very fresh and natural smelling citrus notes, and those 2 are bergamot and Amalfi lemon, okay? The Amalfi lemon and bergamot combine to give this very bright summer day feeling. The sun is actually shining through this window right here as I speak. And if you can just imagine, like, close your eyes and think of the Amalfi Coast, okay? Think of the zesty freshness of the fresh citruses there and all that stuff, and the sunshine and the brightness feeling. You know, citruses in that form add a lot of brightness. The heavier, sweeter citruses like orange add heavierness. So instantly you have this very fast contrast. Even in the beginning of the fragrance, you get this contrast. The three citruses make it feel very unique, okay? And keep in mind, this is a Chypre, so there's a million other things swirling around in the background as you're smelling this. One of those other things, though, in the beginning that you will get is orange blossom. And that orange blossom adds sort of this freshness to it. So instantly you have the heavier, syrupier, sucrosier orange juice that's sweeter. And then it's being lifted up by the orange blossom, which is slightly floral, slightly soapy, slightly fresh, and the freshness of the beautiful, natural smelling citruses flanking that orange juice, okay? That is the opening. So the candied citrus opening that's how I would describe it. But very quickly, you're going to notice that this is about a 6-hour dry down, by the way, and this is a very fresh spray I just did before the video. But very quickly, you're going to get spices and herbs, okay? The herbs smell like an herb salad. I mean, literally like you've chopped up fresh thyme and basil and rosemary and, you know, maybe put some olive oil on top or something, maybe a dash of mint. The mint, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit of mint in here, just a little bit to add freshness, because those fresh citruses kind of flanking the heavier OJ smell really feels lifted up and minty and extra fresh. But I would guess that was done by some of these herbs that make this fragrance feel very aromatic. You know, you think about aromatic fougere is a very common type of fragrance for a man, but you don't see many aromatic Chypres, but that's exactly what this is. Very herbal and aromatic and fresh, and the contrast is there from the very beginning, okay? So once that 1 to 2 hour mark hits, that's where the floral notes that are sitting in the back waiting, okay? When you first look at the Amalfi Coast, you're looking at the citrus trees and all this stuff, and all of a sudden you realize, damn, there's a lot of florals in the background. Those florals in the background swell, as Mr. Darren Allen calls it, and that swell grows in strength, okay, until they really start to shine. So they go from almost like, you know how some flowers, like, kind of when the sun's down, they just kind of, and then the sun comes up and all of a sudden they're perky and they're trying to follow the sun. All of a sudden these flowers are perky and ready to go. The jasmine is of the grandiflorum variety, and it's slightly indolic, slightly honeyed. It has that rolling jasmine feel, that slightly dirty but big white floral feel, but honeyed florals. And the florals all of a sudden start to feel much denser, okay? So in the beginning, it's almost like you could put your hand through them, like they're a cloud, like they're a hologram. Now all of a sudden, they've grown into a solid form. The florals are heavier, and they actually tend to grow in strength as the fragrance moves along from hour 1 to hour 2 to hour 3. All of a sudden you notice, wow, the floral heart of this fragrance really does start to take over. And it's massive and prominent and beautiful, but don't forget that buttery aspect, that smeared butter aspect that just stays with this fragrance all the way to the end. So the carnation here is, by the way, a lot of the ingredients used here are absolutes. So he's used carnation absolute, jasmine grandiflorum absolute, May rose absolute. We've talked about the difference between absolutes and the actual autos, like the rose auto, for example, versus the absolute, okay? There's also ylang ylang in here, but the carnation sort of adds this slightly green tint to the floral smell and spiciness, because carnation adds this very vintage. I've always thought actual carnation absolute, which I have some of the actual absolute itself, smells like you took leaves and stems and all this stuff and like put it in a blender and blended it together and added some spice on top with the floral bits, like a dark floral note. Blends beautifully with leather. Now there's no leather in this, but I could easily see somebody maybe trying to make the case that, yeah, they do pick up a little bit of leather here or there, That's not uncommon for such a complex Chypre like this, but there is technically no leather note. Okay, I'm going to do a quick water break. Okay, so as I said, this is a Chypre. I spent all this time talking about how important oak moss is, and now I'm going to say oak moss is the most important ingredient in the base, right? Wrong. Actually, I think this fragrance takes a little bit of a curveball. Obviously, the oak moss is extremely important, and I would like to know how Darren Alan built this, whether he just used 5% oak moss and said, fuck you, Ifra, which I wish someone would do on camera. Actually, I'll do it right now. Fuck you, Ifra. Or the fractionated kind, if you will. But what comes through to me as the hours tick by, once you get deeper into the dry down, I'm always amazed at this sort of muskiness that starts to come through. The musk in here feels real. And I don't know if Darren Alan uses real musk or not, because again, I don't know enough about the house to be honest with you, but it feels like he uses real musk deep into the dry down. The musk here feels kind of stocky and meaty, you know? Instead of fighting with the mosses, they blend beautifully, but it is a musky dry down, old school musky dry down. I could totally see somebody saying, you smell like grandma wearing this, because you've got the big floral heart, you've got the musky animalic dry down. There is some civet in here as well. So civet and deer musk, but the civet, for someone who has such a big tolerance for animalics, I think the civet is very toned down. Now you may smell this and go, oh my God, how could anyone wear that? I think it's extremely tame, personally. But that's just my 2 cents. But the real musk part is the interesting part, because it does blend beautifully. And since it's very close to being an artisanal house, from my understanding, there is also real white ambergris in here. So I think he's tinctured real white ambergris, real musk, real vanilla beans, real, I don't know what the other one, tonka bean, like the tinctures of these himself, and kind of put it all together, okay? So, as I mentioned in rambling earlier, the fragrance gives you a lot to smell. As you can see, there is a lot of alleyways and pathways that you can go down. And sometimes I think that sticky orange juice feel dominates in the opening. Sometimes when I smell it, I think there's like this benzoin labdanum combination that just feels plump and rotund and round, you know? Like it takes up a lot of space. And then later on, I'll think, you know what? Actually, it doesn't take up a lot of space, because if the labdanum ate all this space, I wouldn't be able to smell the beautiful sandalwood into the dry down. I wouldn't be able to get this meditative side, the musky, sandalwoody meditative side. So, as I've told the story before, but I was actually raised Catholic, and they love to throw around the age of understanding. Like, you know, when you're old enough, the age of understanding, you'll know what a sin is, kind of thing. Well, my age of understanding when it came to perfume, once I was old enough to know what the hell was going on in good perfume, in bad perfume, I loved Chypres from the very beginning, okay? So, my excitement and enjoyment of Chypre number 1 may not be shared with you. I will tell you that. Take this review with a big grain of salt. There is something about the mossy, mysterious side of Chypres which do it for me every single time, okay? It's so interesting, it's throwback, it's vintage, it's all this amazing stuff. I love the old school. Mr. Darren Alan calls this a throwback to the decadent age of perfumery, okay? And there is something very old school about this, as I've said multiple times now, but this may best be suited for the connoisseur. Like, if you're not someone who is familiar with fragrance history, you know, if you're looking for the newest club banger or the newest panty dropper or chick picker-upper or whatever the hell it is, this may not be for you. Although, depending on how you wear it, I think any fragrance could be. I think this could be the next, you know, panty dropper or whatever you want to call it. But it isn't traditionally going to be that. This is not going to traditionally be what people think about when they think about those things. I think this does take a little bit of maturity and understanding of the fragrance game and how everything evolved over time. So, late into the dry down, you're going to get more and more of those kind of individual tinctures that Darren Alan made, like the tonka bean, like the vanilla, like the hints of the orris butter. That feels buttery a long way throughout the fragrance, as I've discussed. The whole fragrance carries that texture of melted butter. Also, from time to time, I get this berry-like smell. this is the part where I kind of start to question myself, because there's a berry note, like a coffee berry note in civet, because of course civet's all about the civet. Well, not the civet note itself, but the civet animal. And they eat coffee berries and then poop them out and sell for $500 a thing of coffee. So stupid, but it's true. And so my brain is like, I get a little bit of a berry note in this. It's not listed. That fruity connotation could come from great Chypres of the past, a la something like Mitsouko, which use peach, or all these other kind of, you think about the plum and Roja's Femme and stuff like that. Or it could be because this fragrance reminds me so much of civet that I just get notes that I also get in civet. That's the part where I start to question my own brain. And that's also the part where smelling many other things can be good or it can be a detriment, because instantly your brain starts to go back to some of the other things you've smelled. But I would love to know your thoughts on the fragrance. I think it's an extraordinary creation by Darren Alan. I think his perfumes are very well made for a self-made perfumer. He's been doing it for 20 or 30 years, whatever it is. But I love wearing these type of fragrances anytime, really. But in 2024, when everyone else is just wearing all this shit, and it is absolute dog shit out there, by the way. If you've ever been to a fragrance counter in 2024, God bless your soul, because it is awful. It is dark times out there indeed. It's the Armageddon, basically, in fragrance speak. And so I love wearing stuff like this because no one else is wearing anything like this, unless they're wearing some of these old Chypres, which I love wearing stuff like this too. But unless they're really into perfume like I am, or they like stole one of the fragrances from their grandma's bureau, they're not going to be smelling like this. And I love being individualistic. I love going against the grain. It's one of the traits in me that I don't think will ever change. I am a contrarian through and through, period, end of story. And so while everyone else is going this way, I love going this way. And this fragrance does that for me. So again, thank you, Rachel, for sending me this beautiful Discovery Atomizer. I'll still get a lot more enjoyment out of this. Thank you to the person who sent the sample, Chypre No. 1 sample. Anytime I get 2 of the same fragrance, I think, okay, it's time to review the damn thing. Mostly so I can put it away from everything else in the reviewed pile, and then I can go back to the 1,000 other fragrance in the waiting to be reviewed pile. So, by the way, if you have sent me something, please be patient, because literally when I say there's 1,000 fragrances in the waiting to be reviewed pile, I'm not just saying that. I track everything on Parfumo. There is literally 1,000 fragrances waiting. I looked it up the other day. 1,000 fragrances. So if you send me something and I don't talk about it for a year or two, don't be upset. I will get to it. I promise. It's just a matter of when. As long as I'm breathing and still loving fragrances like I do, I plan on doing this. So thank you to everybody who has commented and liked and subscribed. We're very close to 9,000 subscribers, which I cannot wait to hit 9,000 so we can do some sort of celebratory video. And then 10,000 will be the really big one. Maybe we'll do like a 24-hour live stream or something crazy for that one. But as always, thank you to everybody who's part of the Ram fam and here with us. It's a pleasure doing these videos for you guys. I hope you get some enjoyment or knowledge or information on the different fragrances to help steer you in your journey. So as always, pleasure. Take care. Cheers. Peace. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.